In a world drowning in data, open source intelligence is the difference between noise and insight. I'm Jake Creps, and this is the OSINT Podcast, unpacking the tools, tactics, and techniques that matter to the OSINT community. Whether you're tracking threats, analyzing platforms, or just trying to separate signal from noise, this is your go-to resource for all things open source intelligence. Let's get started. Hey everyone, and welcome to the 11th episode of the OSINT Podcast. I'm your host, Jake Creps. In today's episode, we're going to be covering issues number 91 and 92 of the OSINT Newsletter. If you want to follow along, it's osintnewsletter.com/91 for the free issue, which is AI and OSINT, and osintnewsletter.com/92 for the paid issue, which is how I discover new OSINT methods, where I step through the active and passive discovery methods for me finding new OSINT tradecraft. In addition to that, I'm going to be covering the 3 free articles that I post at the beginning of the newsletter, as well as the 3 tools that I reference and how you can integrate them into your existing OSINT workflow. But with that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. For the sake of brevity, for the free issue, I'm just going to do a high-level overview of what's included. Again, if you want to follow along, it's osintnewsletter.com/91. With that in mind, here is what's in it at a high level. The article discusses what AI can do for you, specifically the tasks that it's really good at, excluding the things that it's not so good at. It mentions things like reading and summarizing more text than a human can, drawing out patterns or contradictions in certain types of data, extracting specific types of data, cross-referencing with other tools, translating foreign languages at a very basic level, excluding things like local dialects in most cases, and then coming up with fresh angles or unexpected pivots, things that might take you out of your normal workflow or biases. Then it moves on to talking about prompting and how to talk to AI, specifically the different things you should give an AI in your prompt to make sure that you get an adequate result, including what the role is for the AI, who it should act like, what type of role it should have, like, hey, you should be an OSINT analyst in this case, the task you wanted to do specifically, the rules and regulations of what types of data you're looking for, so saying you should give me X, Y, and Z, but exclude X, Y, and Z, for example, and then the output format. Do you want a table? Do you want a PDF? Do you want a CSV? Do you want an ordered list? This kind of are the types of things that this article covers. Then it talks about common pitfalls, like why do my responses still suck? Like despite all of these rules that I'm following, why am I still getting bad results? And it covers things like telling the AI not to guess, giving it very strict rules of saying, hey, if you don't know the answer, just say you do not know the answer. Don't try to please me, for example, and just give me information for the sake of completing the task. Things like breaking down the information instead of bombarding it with a ton of information, maybe giving it step-by-step instructions. And then most importantly, if you run into consistent problems, make sure that you iterate, you understand the problems, and then you go ahead and integrate those types of fixes into your original prompt until you can tune that prompt so that you get repeatable results every single time. Then we pivot on over to the AI team and tools for AI OSINT. Like I said, I'm going to go over this at a high level. It covers general purpose AI analysts like ChatGPT and Claude, the things that it's good at and the things you should use it for. Then visualizers and mapping tools, things like Maltego and OSINT Industries Palette, for example, and how you can use the AI tools that are built in to assist you with visualizing different investigations and the connection between different data points. And then archive and capturing tools like Hunchly, where you can integrate AI into those types of workflows as well. Then moving into things that may be a little bit more robust or sophisticated, like large-scale data processors, things like Elastic AI and Haystack. These are all things that I encourage you to read through in the article. Again, osintnewsletter.com/91. There's a wealth of information, and again, this is a free issue of the OSINT newsletter. Then we move on to a specific example, OSINT with AI in action. So it's a step-by-step tutorial about taking a profile and analyzing the profile to start. Then asking the AI to generate different pivot points. Now that you have this information from the profile, where should I look next? It gives you a list of things that you can compare to your normal list and make sure that there's nothing that you're overlooking. Then examining documentation, being able to pull information based on the pivots that you made, extract the data, and then feed it back to the AI to be able to analyze things. It's already looked at the profile. It already understands the pivots that it's given you. Now that you have the information, you want to go ahead and have it review everything accordingly. Then we just kind of go over the key takeaways, how all this stuff ties together, and to make sure that you understand that AI should be used as an assistant and not as a way to replace the investigative process, understanding the limitations of AI, and it's generally just dumb and not very useful. And then the use of many different tools together, how you can integrate these things together. And also, most likely, when you are running into issues with AI and you're constantly digging your feet in to make it better, you should realize that, sometimes you should realize that this isn't the tool for the job. If it's continuing to hallucinate and it's not giving you the results, you shouldn't spend the next 3 hours trying to make it work for you. You might just realize that this might be a job for a little bit of elbow grease and the human investigator instead. So it's a great issue, especially to get your feet wet with integrating some of the new technologies that we're seeing and being pushed heavily into your OSINT methodology. Let's go ahead and move on to the paid issue of the OSINT newsletter. I'm going to start by covering the 3 news topics that are in the free portion of the newsletter. The first one on the list is titled Analyzing Footage of Minneapolis ICE Shooting. Now, as a quick disclaimer, as many of you know, I typically do not take a political stance on these high-profile investigations. What I really appreciate from this post from Bellingcat is it also doesn't really take a political stance. Jake Godin, who is the author of the post, he kind of steps through all the different tools, tactics, and techniques that he used to further investigate this particular shooting. And from what I understand at the time of this recording, there are 2 different shootings that happened in Minneapolis. This one specifically covers the shooting of Renee Good. Now, the first thing that he covers is the available satellite imagery for the neighborhood. One thing that really called out to me in this is that it shows older imagery of the neighborhood. And if you look at the available videos that are of the shooting, it's happening in winter months, so it's difficult to really understand the terrain that is available in that neighborhood. By looking at older imagery, you can have a better, overall understanding of what's going on in this video. Moving into the videos, he actually does an analysis of very, very small details that are important to know. For example, he has one image of the ICE agent that I think was involved in the shooting, where it shows that he has the camera app open on his phone. So there was some speculation whether or not an ICE agent was recording himself, but based on this angle in the image, you can actually show that he had the video version of the camera app open, which allows you to know that he was likely recording the situation as well. So there's additional footage that's available. If you want to read it, go ahead and check out the first news article in the OSINT newsletter and issue number 92. It should be the top one on the list. On the note of ICE, there's an additional article that was posted from Tate's online safety community, and it's an OPSEC related post. It's titled, Your Phone is a Tracking Device, and the government and others are buying and using the data to find you. It talks about how tools like PenLink are being used to track millions of phones and how they're selling that data to the government and any of the high bidders that are willing to buy enterprise tools. It originally cites a 404 Media post titled ICE to Buy Tool that tracks locations of hundreds of millions of phones every single day. This post from Tate's online safety community, however, talks about how you can protect yourself from these types of data privacy violations. It talks about specifically when you use mobile applications, which is the source of a lot of this data, you want to make sure that you never enable GPS tracking. And if you do enable GPS tracking for things that are required, you want to make sure that they only use GPS while using the app and not forever, for example. That way you just limit your exposure if there's things that specifically require you to use GPS. The next thing, which is option number 2 on the list, is buying a privacy by design cell phone. There are a lot of phones that are available. One of them is from a brand called Purism. I've actually, I think, looked into some of their laptops in the past. But they're an OPSEC by design, company, and this isn't an ad for them. But if you're really, really concerned about it, or if there's a device that you need to use specifically for investigations that need pretty secure OPSEC, then that might be an option that you can explore. The third option is keeping your smartphone as is, but then taking specific steps to reduce the risk of being tracked. These are things that we've all sort of heard of, like turning off ad tracking on Apple devices and deleting the advertising ID on Android devices. The latter is very important. The advertising ID on Android devices is often what's used by these mobile apps to correlate a specific device to your location. They're able to use some of these data points to be able to pinpoint specific users. And then law enforcement, who has the ability to subpoena information, things like that, they'd be able to pull more information about those devices, specifically who owns them, or metadata that might infer who owns these specific devices. So definitely something that you want to look at just from your own data privacy perspective. It also says minimize the apps on your device and use the only ones that you absolutely need. For example, you should regularly do audits on your phone and make sure that you don't have applications that you've tried out for a little bit, but you actually never use regularly, because it might be mining information about you that might be sold to one of these aggregators or marketplaces that sell the data to other third parties. The next thing it talks about is restricting location permissions on your device. Already talked about that a little bit. No need to beat that dead horse. I think a lot of us are already, pretty, sensitive to how our location is being set on phones. I know for mine, for example, I turn location off on pretty much every app except for things that are like my Tesla app, for example, that needs I need to be able to get into my vehicle. So things like that, obviously you can't really get around, but other things like games or other applications, you can definitely turn the location settings off. There's more, interesting insights. It pivots into some of the older articles that Tate wrote in his blog. But if you haven't checked out his Substack already, go ahead and check out the second post in the OSINT newsletter, and definitely subscribe to his Substack, especially if you're interested in open source intelligence and OPSEC, because he has a wealth of really valuable information to help improve your OPSEC online. To keep up with other current themes, specifically the free issue of the OSINT newsletter that came out most recently, is the third article that I mentioned is Introducing AI Whisperer, Feed Massive Files to AI with Less Data Exposed. This is actually from Hank Von Ness, and he writes about it in Digital Digging, his Substack. There's also a GitHub repository that I linked to where you can actually try the tool for yourself. But this is a problem that I've actually experienced myself. And the problem is you have a very large file. You try to feed it into an LLM to do some analysis on it, some of the things that I alluded to in the free issue of the OSINT newsletter. But the problem is it says the file is too large. Let's say it's like 500 megs or something like that. It's way too large for you to upload into these LLMs. So you run into an issue where you either have to split the file manually into smaller chunks of files and feed it one by one and hope that the AI can connect the dots between them. Or you have to copy and paste data from the files and do it that way. And so what Hank did is he sort of took this problem and tried to build a tool that would be able to help people, kind of get past this limitation. And so what AI Whisperer does is it takes a large PDF, for example. Since PDFs are very, memory intensive, it uses a variety of different technologies to extract information from the PDF and turn it into a text file. These are much smaller files that you can easily send to LLMs. But most importantly is he understands that a lot of these PDFs are related to investigations, and they contain sensitive data that you may not want to upload into any cloud environments or put online really at all, especially things that might be associated to the devices that you're using. So what he does with this tool is it automatically analyzes the data to be able to find sensitive information. It'll redact that data. It'll allow you to be able to send that data to LLMs. And then when you get the information back from the LLM, for example, if you have an IP address, instead of it saying IP, the specific IP, it might just say IP address number 1. It'll allow you to encode that, change it to IP number 1, send it to LLMs, get it back, and then decode that information to be able to transform it back into the original IP address. You can do this with phone numbers, you can do this with email addresses, first and last names, things like that. And so overall, it's sort of like a middleware between your files and LLMs with the OSINT investigator in mind. It's kind of designed with a Mac OS first mindset. I think Hank uses a Mac, so do I, so I didn't run into many issues, but it's free to use. And the best part about it is it doesn't require any LLM integration. You don't have to put in an API token from OpenAI, for example. It'll do all of the decoding locally. It'll give you the file. You can just upload that file into your existing LLMs, do your normal workflows, get the data back, send it back to AI Whisper to decode, and then go ahead and move on with your day. So definitely go ahead and check that out. It's the third article. It's kind of a good transition to the tools section, because not only is it an article talking about the problem set, it also links to the tool that you can use for your own workflows. That brings us into the tools section of the OSINT newsletter for this issue. And the first one that's mentioned is called OSINT Investigators Toolkit. Now, this is a very beginner-friendly tool. It's essentially just a database, an aggregator of different tools for different use cases, but what's really great about it is it's very user-friendly. You can go ahead and enter a search term for something specific, and you can also filter by different tool types. And it'll give you a variety of both free and paid tools that you can go ahead and explore. So if you're new to the OSINT space and you're looking for available tools, there's a lot of different options that are out there. Go ahead and check this one out. It'll specifically give you stuff that I haven't seen in many other aggregators, like blockchain tools, for example, and specific things for data breaches, which is something that's often left out. So I really like the user interface and how it all comes together. And I know that I always want to include things that are going to be helpful, not only for our intermediate and advanced investigators, but also for our beginner investigators as well. The next tool on the list is called Leak Hub, and this is something that's kind of got a confusing name. You would think that it'd be something related to data leaks, but what it actually is something really niche. And so there's a variety of different LLMs that are available. For those who are familiar, you have stuff from Anthropic, you got stuff from Meta, you got stuff from OpenAI, from Google, etc. But the question always is like, why am I running into issues with my prompts, right? I alluded to this earlier in the podcast. And one of the things that's not very transparent from these organizations is what are the input prompts that are given to the LLMs before you even ask your first question, right? What are the rules? What are the limitations? And so what this tool is it's kind of like a database of all the different things that have been leaked about these different LLMs and the specific models, including sort of the guidelines and rules that are given to these LLMs before you even put in a specific input. Now, the reason why this is important for OSINT investigators, specifically those using AI in their workflows, is that it kind of gives you a better understanding of what the tools can do, and it also gives you an understanding of which LLM is best for the job that you need at hand. If you find that, let's say, OpenAI is too restrictive, you can compare the rules and guidelines that are given to a specific model of an OpenAI LLM to that of like Llama or something that's provided from Meta to something that Gemini might provide, and say, hey, I think that the guidelines are loose enough for this specific use case that I'm going to be using Gemini for all of my investigative needs moving forward, for example. And if you reference some of the older stuff that I wrote about VS Code and the different LLMs that are available for agents, for example, if you have a specific task or a tool that you want to build, I would probably reference this list first and say, hey, which agent should I use, or which LLM should I use for my agent so that I get the best results? And this is something that was typically trial and error, where you would use a lot of your credits to kind of figure out what works best. But if you reference this first, it'll probably give you a better place to start. So go ahead and check that out. It's the second one on the list. It is called Leak Hub, and it's a web app, so you don't have to go to GitHub or anything like that. You can go ahead and just go straight to the site and start looking for more information. The last one on the list is called The Big Brother, and it's sort of a username tool on steroids, because not only does it fetch profiles based on an input username, it also extracts images from those profiles and provides you with search engine results for those images. So think like you put in John Smith as a username, it gives you a Facebook profile, hypothetically a Twitter, Instagram, Blue Sky, whatever. It extracts the image from that profile, and then it runs that image into Google, Yandex, etc., and gives you search results for the image. So it's kind of a way to explode out a specific username and be able to give you specific connected data points together based on the image that's involved. Now, one of the things that I don't think it has, and something that would be very interesting, is both an integration of LLMs, so something like Llama, for example, but also you could use something like the tool face recognition that's offered by Python to be able to group the images together. So for example, let's say you put a username in, you get 200 results. You use face recognition to group all of the profile photos together that have a matching face, and then be able to essentially like split the data apart so that you can get specific information that you know is connected based on face recognition, and then have everything else as a secondary source. So instead of having to look at 150 profiles, let's say that the face recognition tool just groups them by, 30 that actually match from face recognition. You can start there and know that there's a high fidelity chance, or a high probability chance, that all those profiles are of the same person. So if the person that wrote the GitHub tool, which we'll shout you out on LinkedIn and X and other platforms, is listening, please check that out, because I think it would be a really good addition to this tool. So that's it for the free version of the OSINT newsletter. Again, osintnewsletter.com/92. Please subscribe to the newsletter if you haven't already. It's an exact companion for this podcast, so it'll really help you when you're following along. We usually publish the newsletter a day before the podcast so that you can read the newsletter, get familiar with the content, and then go ahead and listen to the podcast for more context. In addition, we also have CTFs that we're running every week on the newsletter. It's really hard to kind of talk about the CTFs and how to get to them on the podcast. So if you head on over to the newsletter, there'll be a direct link to the CTF where you can take some of these OSINT methodologies and apply them and build your skill set. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the paid content within this issue, which is how I discover new OSINT methods. And once again, this is just a play-by-play on how I discover new methods, both from an active standpoint and a passive standpoint, and I'll explain what all those mean. So, how do I discover new OSINT methods? First, just for clarification, I just want to talk about what do I mean by an OSINT method. What I mean by an OSINT method is that you have a variety of data that you already have about a specific target, whether that's a person, place, or a thing. For a person, for example, it could be an email address, an image, a username, a phone number, things like that. For a place, it might be the coordinates, it might be images about that place, it might be a variety of other different data points that are available. What I'm talking about with new OSINT methods is how do you take that data, put it into some sort of transform, if you want to call it that, and get new data that you didn't have before. So the method is take the data I have and give me data that I didn't. And in this article, or I guess in this podcast as well, I want to discover how I actively search for new methods. So how do I specifically target new methods that I'm looking for? And then how do I passively search for them? So as I'm just normally using the web, how do I be like, hey, I think there might be something here. Let me dig into it a little bit further. So I'm going to go ahead and start with active search methods. So the first thing that I want to do is just kind of talk about the difference between active and passive. So active is like, hey, I want to find a new method for x.com, or a new method for LinkedIn or TikTok, whatever. So I go ahead and I look for what currently exists, find the gaps, and try to close the gaps. For passive, it's kind of like, hey, I was just, Googling around, or like, for example, I wrote in this article about how I was using a portal for my HOA, and I realized that I just put in my account number, and then presto, my first, last name, my wife's first and last name, my email address, my address, all this information of me popped up. I was like, well, what if I just kind of enumerate across a ton of different account names and see what pops up? And sure enough, I start finding information about my neighbors. So that's really the difference, is like, I didn't specifically go out and say, hey, I want to find information from HOAs, and then let me dig into these search engines. It's more like you find it as you go, or you kind of train your brain to be able to know what to look for. And then once you see it, you then are able to know how to dig further. So I'm gonna go ahead and talk about actively searching for new methods first. Now, the first thing you want to understand is that, like, present time right now, pretty much all the methods have been discovered for a specific site. Maybe not all of them, but a significant majority of the valuable ones. When you're actively searching for new methods, you're looking for brand new features or brand new functionality on an application. So in the last issue I wrote about, maybe it was the last issue, I wrote about how you can find the account locations on x.com based on a new feature, which was the account based in data point from X. Now, this was something that there wasn't a lot of write-ups for, because at the time, the tool had only been out for like a week. There was a lot of conversation about, influence campaigns, and be able to say like, hey, this account just continuously retweets content that's posted from X accounts that are based in Russia, and this person is based in, Canada. So the first thing you want to do is be able to find, like, how do I find the new features? And there's both the app itself and then the APIs, what's available for developers, for example. And I talk about both of them in this issue. The first thing that I do is I sort of like look at API change logs for developers. So I'll start with the developer side first. Is oftentimes if there's updates to an API or something like that, they'll have a change log or some type of new documentation that's available. These come out on a regular basis. They follow usually a specific format, and you're able to dig into those and be able to say, hey, they changed this endpoint, or hey, there's this new feature available, or hey, they added in new rate limiting or different types of, pagination or something like that. You're able to then look at the site itself, find the APIs that are being called, and then be able to manipulate them accordingly and find new methods. So for example, let's say that you find that the API's default limit is 500 search results, but then they have like a filter that says limit equals 500. And you're like, well, what if I change the limit to 50,000? And it's like, okay, well, now you have 50,000 search results in a single query instead of 500. These are the types of things that I look for when I'm actively looking at APIs that are available for specific sites. From a feature perspective, I usually rely on news articles, things that are talking about up and coming new features or new leaks of new features that are coming out. So at the time of this writing, it looks like X is planning on creating a new feature for crypto traders. The name of the feature is called, let me just pull it up for a specifically here. It is called starter packs. And starter packs are going to be this new feature that comes out where I think it aggregates specific types of data together to make it easier to find. And so with that in mind, when the feature launches, I'll know that I immediately should go check it out and look out, for what's happening under the hood to see if maybe there's a new API that's pulling this data. Maybe that API has, very loose constraints because it's brand new. And maybe based on that, I can be able to integrate that data set into a tool that already exists or create a new tool of my own that will be able to fetch data very efficiently and hopefully get data before the application gets patched, because I'm assuming that abuse comes immediately after. And that's something, one of the reasons I'll just kind of shout out again that I put a lot of my content behind paywalls is because if I don't, it gets indexed by search engines. These sites find out about the methods and then they patch them, which in one lens is great for data privacy because it's like, probably shouldn't be abusing that anyways. But from an investigator standpoint, you now lost the method. So I understand that the paywall is sometimes kind of annoying. We try to keep the newsletter as cheap as possible. And as I mentioned in the last post about OSINT certifications, you can get 100 years of the OSINT newsletter for the same cost as a typical OSINT course or training that's available. So just something to keep in mind. So once you have this new method, right, this new source of data, you want to turn that sort of new feature into a method. And like I said, what I typically like to do, new feature comes out, pull up the new feature in the user interface, open up developer tools, see what's going on underneath the hood, pull that API out, put it into Postman, replay it, make sure that I can use the same authentication that's in the browser, but use it out of the browser. Goof around with the query a little bit, the API query, remove some headers, see what's required, see what isn't, try to make it as lightweight as possible, see what filters are available, which flags are being used in the API. Look at older documentation, see if there's existing flags that are useful. Like let's say there's a search API, it has 15 different filters. This new API only has 3. Well, what happens when you stick some of those search filters on this one? Do they apply here as well? Just kind of like poking at it a little bit, testing out to see what's available. And then from there, in Postman, for example, it'll have a curl of that available. If you just like click a button, it'll be able to show everything that you're goofing around in the tool. Export it as a curl, which is just a way to be able to play it in the command line. Instead of playing it in the command line, I'll go ahead and feed it into VS Code and say, hey, turn this into a Python script. It'll turn it into a Python script, or maybe I want to make it a browser extension or something like that. Or most importantly, what I mentioned before is that let's say there's already a tool that I'm using, for example, like a username tool, like Sherlock, for example, and say, hey, like I want to just add this to Sherlock so that the tool that I'm already using has this new feature and functionality that's available, and I don't have to publish it online or like merge it into Sherlock. I can just use my own local version of it. So that's sort of what I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about like active search methods, right? Take your top social media profiles, take your top search engines that are available, and be able to be on the lookout for those. If you're looking for very, very niche examples, let's say like VSCO, for example, is one thing that I'm thinking about, or what I talked about in the past. I talked about like golf apps and being able to use those for OSINT investigations, or maybe some like, alternative social media sites like Truth Social, which I wrote about in the past. Being able to really look out for those. And the biggest thing that you want to look out for is like, how many monthly active users does this thing have? If I do find a new method, it will actually be valuable, or am I going to be querying a data set of like 5,200 people? These are all things that you want to take into consideration. And I mentioned a lot more of these in the written portion of this newsletter. Now, the next thing is passively searching for new methods. Now, I mentioned all these different things that I look out for when I'm actively searching for things. But once you actively search for things for a very long time, you start picking up on patterns. And when you see those patterns emerge again, you know that like just make a little note to yourself on the side to be able to follow up on this later. Now, I kind of close this thing out like as like a fusion discovery method, but I'll use that as sort of a way to talk about the passive search techniques. The first thing you want to do, first and foremost, is always be on the lookout for search engines, and specifically search engines that return listed information. And what I mean by listed information is like Google, for example. You Google OSINT, it comes back with like 10 search listings, right? This isn't the case for Google, but for other search engines, like things that you find on social media or Craigslist or something like that, oftentimes that's just a long JSON string. The UI will consume that data and put it in an ordered list in the user interface, right? Anytime you see a search engine that creates listed results, that's prime for OSINT investigations, right? You can change that filter to maybe from 10 search results to like 10,000, have a tool export that to a CSV, and then presto, you have a table of like an entire database, for example. Anytime you use an app that has a social feature, like inviting friends to join you or importing context, that's something that automatically triggers something for me. It's like, I just tried this new app. I wasn't looking for OSINT methods, but I'm trying this new app just for personal reasons. And it's saying, hey, invite your friends, or hey, import your contacts. It's like, you know what? Let me go ahead and put this in my lab and see what happens if I actually import my contacts. And presto, before you know it, all of my phone numbers in my contact list, now it's turning that into profiles for that social media. And like now I have this new method to turn a phone number into a person, for example. Any app that gives you an option to log in with an email or a phone number is likely going to give you a partial clue for one or the other. Meaning if you can log into PayPal with your email or your username or your phone number, right? If you go to forget password, for example, which is kind of like a gray method, but people still use it. If you enter the phone number, or let's say like, you want to reset your password, enter your phone number, it'll say, okay, send an email to this email, and it'll like kind of star out the different characters that are associated with the email, but it'll still say like gmail.com, for example, or yahoo.com. Now you know this phone number is associated with a Gmail. Maybe you have a couple different letters that are associated as well. Maybe you have a username that matches the first few letters that are not obfuscated and a Yahoo, and you're like, let me plug in that username at yahoo.com, and then before you know it, you can use a tool like OSINT Industries, turn that email address into a person, and now you have a phone number, an email address, a username, and a person. Any advanced search feature that has filters likely has more than it's telling you about. What I mean by that is, let's say you go to a site, I think Twitter Advanced Search, for example, is one of the ones that first comes to my mind. There's all these different options to filter your search, but there's probably more options that are available. Just like I mentioned before, do yourself an advanced search, pull out the API, see what it's all doing, test out all the individual filters, create some documentation, then go find other stuff that you find throughout the site and see if it can also apply to advanced search. So always be on the lookout for any advanced search. It doesn't have to be social media. It could be government websites. You could be doing your taxes and be like, hey man, this is like a really advanced search option. Let me see what's going on underneath the hood, for example. Next thing is profile pages are often powered by API endpoints, right? If you land on a profile page, there's going to be information that's consumed from an API. That profile usually only grabs 5 or 6 data points. Image, first and last name, username, maybe location, whatever. Under the hood, there's probably 20 different data points. It's only consuming 5 or 6. If you look underneath the hood, you'll find more data that might be useful for your investigation. Anytime you land on a profile page, there's probably a chance for things like, when was the account created? When was the last time it was updated? Those types of things that typically do not show up on many profile pages. And like I said, lastly, when you're categorizing information, you're trying to understand what's valuable and what isn't. From an OSINT perspective, at least from a person search perspective, you want to always look at how active of a profile or how active of a site is this. And data points like monthly active users, weekly active users, total number of users, for example, is always going to be useful, because the last thing you want to do is say like, hey, I'm using this site. I noticed that there's some kind of pattern here that I see on all these different sites. I want to investigate further. But then you Google and say, what's the number of monthly active users? And it's like, yeah, it only has 20,000 monthly active users. It's like, well, even if you find a cool method, the data is probably going to be very non-useful unless you just so happen to run into, the 20,000 people that you're looking for, or the needle in a haystack, very small haystack. So once again, there's a lot more details in the written portion of this. It's easier to follow along. And I do link to issue number 89, which is OSINT Newsletter /89, investigating X account locations at scale. Issue number 64, using golf apps for OSINT investigations. That's /64. And then even earlier than that is Truth Social Deep Dive for OSINT, issue number 63. So definitely go back and check those out as well. There's not a podcast available for those because those were written before we relaunched the podcast, at least with issues number 63 and 64, but the write-ups are still very useful. And I double check to make sure that they're still active, and these methods are definitely still active. So once again, thanks again for listening. That's it for this episode of the podcast. Again, please make sure to subscribe to any place that you listen to podcasts. Make sure to leave a good review if you enjoyed this, and just leave us feedback if you didn't. Go ahead and make the podcast better that way. It's really hard to make the podcast better if your ratings go down and they drop down in the search results, for example, because then we get less listeners and then we get less opportunity to get feedback. And then last thing, make sure to follow on LinkedIn and on X. For example, we put all of the videos that show these different tools or show these different things that we're showing. So if you are reading it and it's not clicking, if you're listening to it and it's not clicking, you might be able to look on social and see a video demo of some of these things that we're mentioning, and maybe some of those things will click. And so, for example, AI Whisperer will have a video that will show how all that stuff works. So if you're not really understanding the use case, it'll be really, clear in those videos, for example. So definitely follow us there on X and LinkedIn. I think we're posting a little bit more on LinkedIn, and we're going to be launching Substack Notes here pretty soon. So if you have the Substack app, go ahead and check us out on there as well. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you again in the next episode.